Hey, today I wanted to give a deep dive on the technical implementation of my new user settings module. I'll also touch on the preferences list implementation, which is the XK component I demoed in the other video as well. So my goal with all of this was to register a pretty generic facet, handle all the connections to XConnect and XDB so that as a developer, you didn't have to worry about that. You could just really leverage it and work with visitor data the way you see fit. This is my first 9.3 module, so I actually departed from the old Habitat gulp scripts, and I actually built this on top of Helix base. I tried removing some of the modules I knew I wasn't using. There's probably more I could remove, but I haven't got around. But I mean, the goal is to just have kind of a working local DevOps process where I can deploy locally, and this suit my needs fine. So the user settings itself, I mean, the facet is relatively simple. As I mentioned, is really a dictionary of dictionaries. So this gives you the flexibility to really store and organize different visitor settings and strings how you see fit. Typically, how I'm envisioning it working is every form you have, you use the form as an area name, and then this way all your fields would be stored under the form. But you could mix and match if you want. You can have your own strategies for doing it. It's pretty flexible. Do what you want. I've also implemented a merge user settings handler, which merges the dictionaries together, and it essentially ensures that if you have an unknown contact becoming a known, it merges any settings as long as there's no duplication with them. If you did want to overwrite one with the other, you could uncomment this line, and that will set one versus the other, but I'll leave that to you, and out of the box it's not going to do that. I drive it through configuration, but the only place this works is actually on XConnect, and I actually didn't try to see how to drive that through configuration on XConnect. So just keeping it simple, you can uncomment and deal with it how you see fit. But you never really have to deal with this user setting directly. You could if you really wanted to manage the XConnect lifetime and open up clients and things like that. And what I've really tried to do is make that easy with user settings Facade. Now this is implemented as a singleton. I'm a big fan of the old school going like Sitecore.context, and here you can go user settings.settings and access these through a number of different ways, which I'll show you. I know more modern, or the more typical approach you see for these type of things are services, registering with DI, and we could create a service that basically does the same thing, but being as this will be used a lot, at least within this one, I just went with that. And it's also, I mean, user settings isn't actually new. I've had a version of this going since Sitecore 8. I had to rewrite large parts of it because the way custom facets are handled in Sitecore 9 is different than it was in 8. So this is just an enhanced version with additional features that works on the latest version of Sitecore. But most likely you'll be leveraging the indexer. You can actually just pass the key and it'll use the global default area, which is just a Sitecore setting that's actually set to global. So if I do recommend using area and being explicit where possible, but if you wanted to just store something and you really have a place for it, you could store it in the global area, and that's what would happen by default. We have a couple of kind of internal methods that help with actually fetching the contact and the user settings from XConnect. You can look through those if you want, but it manages, like every time you're actually getting it through the indexer, it's actually opening an XConnect client, it's pulling the setting down and then returning your value. Same thing on save. And I'll talk a little bit later, I add a couple of methods to make it a little more efficient so that if you have multiple items, you're not going to have an issue with that. Okay, so the main getter and setter are here, and you can see it basically is looking within those dictionaries to find your value, and the setter is actually opening up an XConnect client, updating your value, ensuring it exists, and then submitting it through the XConnect client. Of course, this won't be terribly efficient if you're updating or fetching multiple key value pairs, or you want to save multiple key value pairs. So I've actually provided a couple of additional methods like get area, which returns the entire dictionary for a given area, or update area, which will allow you to pass in your own dictionary and have it overwrite that area with whatever values you want, which will be, of course, more efficient than setting them individually because it only creates one connection. Also, additional methods for things like contains area, contains key, getting all the areas, getting all the keys, that will handle most scenarios pretty cleanly. I also showed on the last video the REST API that allows you to make REST calls to fetch all the keys in an area or fetch the value of a particular key within an area. You can find that code within the controllers tab, controllers class, and you can see these actions are all leveraging that same facade to get or set those values. And here you can see the get area and the update area methods. So that being as efficient as possible. Here is the personalization condition. And you can see it requires 3 key pieces of information, which are set with the rules engine, area, key, and value. And then it basically will just say, does that user setting key for that area match that value using the compare method. If you want it to look, you can see actually within our rule definition, I have it open. You can kind of see the description of that and how it wires into that particular class. All right, so that is the condition. I also want to show the Experience Profile tab. Now, this is actually delivering a NuGet package for EE tab, which is actually my proficient colleague Jeff Darchuk's very useful module that makes it easy to add a tab to the Experience Profile without having to build a bunch of speed components, which is actually something I tried to do, and it was taking me way too much. And this was actually pretty easy to do. The tab kind of basically handles Xconnect, getting that facet, providing it as a model to this view, which gets deployed when you install the package, which basically just loops through your areas, displaying all the keys that exist. So pretty clean. I could see in the future if you wanted to kind of wire this up to the other API, you can even provide the ability for people to go in and update particular visitors' user settings if that's something you wanted to enable. You can have at it. The last thing to show as far as the kind of the core module is the forms. So this is a submit action, which on execution will basically loop through all the submitted fields. I have some particular code for your list fields that will basically join any multi-selects to make them comma separated for the miss of that value. And then otherwise it just takes the plain value using reflection. The other thing I don't think I demoed on the other video is a value provider. Now, Sitecore Form value providers allow you to set the default value of a form field. In this case, this value provider allows you to set the default value to come from user settings. So if you, only thing you need to do is use a parameter of the area name, and as long as the key is equal to the field name, it'll pre-populate with that. And that works pretty cleanly. So if you have a form that you know you have the data someplace else, or you wanted to get it from that, you could use the value provider. So that's really what's in the core user settings module. You'll also find feature.preference, which has that preferences list component I demoed. And it's just a standard XSA component. Actually, the steps I went to building it are very similar to what I did for the Slick Carousel XSA component. And I wrote a pretty detailed blog post in terms of all the pieces that go into it. It is implemented as an XSA feature. So after you install it, you can go add this module to your site, and it'll create the necessary data folders and things like that that make it easy. You just drag and drop that component onto the page. And that's really it. And we can take a look through this code if you really wanted to. Just one thought on deployment. So when you go to install this, you'll note there are actually 3 zip files in the release. One is the user settings zip file, which is the Sitecore package just for the user setting feature, which has the REST API, the form handler, and kind of the core facet content. And then there's the XXA component, the preferences list for XXA, which you only need to add if you're using XXA. But you'll also find there's actually an XConnect zip file, which needs to be deployed to your XConnect instance. And that's because it is using that user setting as a facet, and XConnect needs to know about it and know about the merge handler and things like that. So I've done it so you can just unzip and copy it to your root and it'll just work. Of course, if you're in a scaled instance, you can look through that zip file and just make sure you deploy the files in the right locations. And that's it. So this was just a deep dive into the user settings module. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.